Today is Sunday, February 16, 2014, and we're interviewing Dr. Richard A. Foster at the Second Baptist Church in Los Angeles, California. Dr. Foster is 83 years old, having been born on April 19, 1930. My name is Phil Wendell. I'll be doing the interview, and assisting me will be Dee Fujiasco. This interview is being done for the Greater Long Beach chapter of the American Red Cross in conjunction with the Library of Congress and the American Folklife Center. Dr. Foster served in the Army as the rank of sergeant. First and foremost, sir, I want to thank you for your service to our country. We are indebted to you, and we appreciate that very, very much for your serving.
Yes, sir.
Now I want to get your story. I want to have you go back as a kid growing up, where you were born. Tell me about mom and dad, going to school, siblings, those kind of things, and we'll just kind of run from there.
Well, I was born in Chicago, Illinois, St. Luke's Hospital, April 19, 1930. And actually, I was born on my mother's 18th birthday.
Well, she was young.
Yes. And went to school in Chicago, but due to a separation of divorce from my parents, I was sent back and forth between my home and my grandparents in Oklahoma. And actually, I alternated every year until the 8th grade. One year, I guess I got homesick.
That must have been hard to do that.
It was kind of difficult. I love my grandfather. He had 3 daughters. He never had a son. So when my parents split up, he kind of wanted me around him. Then I guess I stayed there a year and get homesick, and they sent me back to Chicago.
How do you compare life in Chicago with life in Oklahoma?
Well, it was quite different, of course. Chicago was a metropolitan city, and Muskogee at that time, in the 40s, 50s, was the 3rd largest city in Oklahoma. You could almost tell what city you're from by the license plate at that time. Because number 1 was Oklahoma City, number 2 was Tulsa, 3 was Muskogee, and I think 4 was Ponca City, as far as I can remember. But the license plates there now are different. And
Was the schooling much different? Could you tell the difference between Chicago education and Oklahoma education?
I'll be honest with you, I think my teachers in Oklahoma were a little more, it was encouraging, I guess, because you have to understand at that time it was segregation in Oklahoma, and I guess the teachers took a little extra time. However, my experience at home in Chicago, I felt was nice too, because I got a chance to mingle with other kids from other races, and it was kind of a balanced experience for me. And even though I experienced segregation, I never acquired the hate mentality. I always accepted people on their work. Like some people say, you get 10 points and then you start subtracting. And it's sort of been my creed. I just always accepted people on the basis, you know. And it was a good experience for me. There was different types, of course. And I rotated back and forth between Muskogee and Chicago, and then one year I was sent to Gary, Indiana. That's my dad's, where his mother was. I was kind of shifted around, but even at that I got quite an exposure growing up and a good view of our country. And
Where'd you go to high school?
well, I started in Chicago, Illinois at Morgan Park High, and then through a domestic situation, my mother sent me to Gary, Indiana to be with my father, and I eventually graduated from Roosevelt High School in Gary, Indiana.
Gary, okay.
And
Any main activities in high school? Were you involved
I
with?
ran track. I was in the Hawaii.
So Gary was integrated, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not at that time.
Was not, okay.
They had one school that was named Frable. It was but not Roosevelt. Of course, this is before 1948.
Right.
And I was in high school plays. I ran track, cross country, and
So you were 11 when the war broke out, Pearl Harbor.
exactly.
Do you have any recall of that?
I remember that exact day. They even gave the numbers of servicemen that was killed by the hour. I can vividly remember that as a child.
How did that affect you, do you think?
Well, I've always been sort of patriotic. In spite of my experiences, I always loved my country. And I feel sorry for the families and the young men who were drawn into an unexpected war.
So when the war broke out, were you in Chicago or were you in Oklahoma?
I was in Oklahoma at that time with my grandfather that year.
How did they react?
I really can't recall, but I'm quite sure my grandfather had some sentimentality towards it. He didn't have any sons, but he had nephews. And it affected him like it affected the rest of us in the country. We kind of knew we were in for a big one. And it turned out to be that.
How did that impact you during high school when you were going to school? Were you having to ration anything?
No, I was going to always, when my grandfather was in service, my dad was in World War II, and I was in ROTC, so I was really geared towards the Army before I even graduated.
You were gung-ho already, huh?
My goal was to go to West Point, but it didn't materialize, but it was. So I had that mentality, I guess. I don't know where I got it from, but
So you spent high school years then with your dad?
my last 2 years,
In
my
Indiana.
first two with my mother in Chicago.
Do you have any siblings?
I had 4 sisters. One is deceased.
Where do you fit in that rank?
I'm the oldest. I'm
You're the
the
oldest,
firstborn.
Okay. So did they follow you also for different schools? Your
No,
sisters?
I was the one that said
They all stayed in
my
Chicago?
grandfather wanted a son. So he sort of requested me. And he was a contractor. He built and moved houses in Oklahoma. I guess he's disappointed I didn't take up this trade, but I was acclimated toward the sciences,
How was staying with your dad?
It was nice. I wasn't with him as much as at a young age. We became quite buddies during the high school years. Because he's a junior and I was a third, and because he was proud of my grandfather and his father, and I was proud of both of them.
So you graduated when?
1948
48.
to high school.
Okay. So did you enlist after high school?
Yeah, I was under that deal called the Selective Service Act of 48. We called it the time it was during the Cold War in the building of that Berlin Wall. And I know you called it. We really didn't know whether we were going to fight Russia or not. So they had at that time what they called the Selective Service Act of 48. At 18, you could volunteer for a year and then come out and serve the reserves for 6. So I was discharged in 49 from active duty, went into the reserves active reserves for a year, and when the career broke out, they called me right back on active duty and sent me to Fort Worth, Washington, which is where they shipped them out, to the Far East.
So for your first year of service,
So
for your first year of service, did you go to boot camp?
to the base in Fort Naskin, Turkey. Then I was shipped to Abilene Proving Ground, Maryland, and that's where I really got exposed to the East Coast.
Well, how was boot camp?
Well, in the Army, you call it basic.
Basic, okay, how was basic?
Navy and the Marines. It was time. See, I had infantry training, although Fort Knox was also a cavalry for tanks to tan.
Why don't we call a timeout here?
I think
Okay, we're going to pick back up again after that delightful song we just heard. And you were going to basic training, the boot camp.
Yeah.
Want to
Yeah.
understand how that was for you?
It's interesting because having an experience in ROTC and also I was a Boy Scout growing up, so I was sort of conditioned with a military mindset, and it was very interesting. A lot of challenges. It taught us, of course, how to use weapons and military strategy, and having been in the ROTC, I was made a squad leader, basic training, because I didn't know how to drill with the rifle and all the commands and everything. It was quite an experience, and knowing how to swim was essential. So what they did was take us to the swimming pool, and in 3 days we'd go on our own. And of course I had known how to swim through the Boy Scouts, so it wasn't a problem for me. And after I finished the basic, I was sent to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland.
Hold that thought for a minute. We are now back on again, recording, and you talked about being assigned to your first assignment in Aberdeen, right?
Yes,
Outside of
sir.
Baltimore.
Yes, sir. At the time, I was just in for a year of active duty, and I was at the time just a soldier, And that's
What were your responsibilities?
Well, believe it or not, I was firing furnaces, and maintaining furnaces. I don't know. I had a much more interesting experience when I went back in as a medic. But anyway, I served my year, and I enjoyed, even then, my exposure to the East Coast. And after having served my year, I went back home to Chicago, and I worked in the Veterans Hospital there, Hands.
How was going home after you've been gone for a year's time period?
Well, it was fine. I was glad to be back around my mother and my sisters.
Had you changed at all, do you think?
I matured with some, I think, at the time. But I did. I worked in Hands Hospital, Veterans Hospital, for a year, and I was in the active reserves, which we met once a month. And then, of course, in October 50, career broke out.
Right.
And they called me right back into active duty. And the ironic thing is, while I was in Fort Lewis, Washington, I also got a draft notice. Of course, my company commander resolved, that issue. And I really thought I was going to Korea. And somehow I got a promotion, and the top sergeant, he got assigned to Germany and took our company, there. But we stayed in I was in Fort Campbell, Kentucky at the time. It's in the 50s. And I was in the medics in the dispensary about a year and a half before we shipped out. And that was my duty.
It made you a medic because of your experience with the VA?
I requested it, sir.
Okay.
My family background was medicine.
Gotcha.
My grandfather and my father, he averaged to go to med school, but he didn't quite make it. He had some health issues when he came back from World War II. And so I was inclined to go to the medical field, and having worked in a medical hospital too. And so anyway, I served in this as a medic at Fort Campbell, and then somehow one week we got orders to go to Korea, and again that was rescinded. And couple of weeks, well, a month or so later, we got orders to go to Germany. So,
You got lucky, didn't you?
yes, sir. So we went to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey. And at that point, I really got exposed to Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York. And I really loved that Eastern environment.
What'd you like about it?
Well, the culture and the historical, especially of Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. And of course, I went to New York and saw the famous black actors, musicians and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, 2 weeks after I visited them, the Apollo Theater. 2 weeks after I went there, we was on orders to go to Germany, and I went to a city called Stuttgart, Germany, and that's Stuttgart, but Schwabers Hall, which was about 30, 40 kilometers from Stuttgart, and I was in the 7th Army, the same one that President General Eisenhower was over. And
Didn't Patton have that one too?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Well, Patton was before you. Patton won the war.
Yeah.
So, of course, at the time, there was a Cold War going on in Europe and the hot war going on in Korea. And ironically, some of the young men that was in basic training with me, because they were RA and in for 3 years, they were shipped directly to Japan. So a lot of the young men whom I had basic with was right there at the inception, of the Korean War. And so I was really lucky. And so my job was as a medic. I worked in the dispensary for a while. Then I made sergeant, and they put me in charge of 10 ambulances. And my job would have been, if World War III had broken out, to evacuate our wounded from some point in Germany to some point in France. And we could be sitting in a movie. And if that alarm goes off, we're supposed to return to camp and evacuate, in about 30, 40 minutes. And that was generally what I was doing while I was in Germany. And of course, I got exposure to Germany. I even saw Hitler's yacht, and I saw a few castles. And I had planned to visit Paris, but I was what they call a Truman soldier, and he let some of us out earlier, so I didn't get a chance to make that visit. And so when I came home, I took advantage of the GI Bill and enrolled in school. I really came to get into UCLA.
So you came back to Chicago?
No, my family, my mother moved to Los Angeles while I was in the Army.
Okay.
That was prior to 52. And I got discharged in 52 from Fort Ord. And of course they paid my way back to Chicago, but I just ended up in Los Angeles where my mother was.
I was coming home to see her for the first time in a year or two.
Yes.
Is that good?
Yeah, my sisters had a fit.
You're welcome home then.
Yes, sir. So my first job coming back here was to work well, it wasn't Sawtell, it was Brentwood. Because the Brentwood side is where the mental patients were, and Wadsworth is for the medical. And I worked on geriatrics for 3 years. And I was going to school part-time at UCLA. And when I got accepted to USC, I transferred, got accepted into pharmacy school, and traced back this same dean that refused me initially.
Now, hang on for 1 second. We got to miss that. Okay, we're back on the interview now. They're done singing for a few minutes at any rate. I wanted to back up a little bit. You had a story to tell about while you were in Germany, and you were interfacing with some of the locals. Tell me about that.
The first thing I left out is on my way to Germany, we went through the White Channel, and actually I saw the White Cliffs of Dover.
Oh yeah.
And that was very interesting. And
Did you go over by ship?
I was on the troop ship.
How was that experience?
It was quite a bit, but you know, I was seasick every day until I saw land. And when I saw France, it cleared up. And yeah, while I was in Germany and on that time that we had off to visit the local town, I met a few Germans, and ironically, I met one young German man who was a little bit older than me, because he was in World War II. He was an ex-SS trooper, and we sit down and had conversation, and he explained to me some of their tactics that they had against us during World War II. One of which, when our paratroopers landed in Germany, they had spikes, you know, as a counter-offensive. And you would think we'd known each other all our life. We just sit there drinking beer and talking. And like I say, he's probably in his late 20s, early 30s, and I was in my early 20s.
Did you ever get into his thought process about the war itself, about World War II?
No, we didn't get into the
Okay.
political aspects, because I had a lot of curiosity. I guess I still do. Well, one group of people I hated so much, it's a mystery, but that's life and you have to deal with it. So, and I got a chance to see a few castles while I was over there, and also we saw Hitler's yacht when I was over there. And it was quite an experience in Europe and a different culture. Of course, it always loomed on my mind, what's going to happen if the Russians come?
Was the yacht the horse whistle? Is that what it was called? The yacht? Hitler's yacht?
It was parked in a little channel. We went over a
Okay.
bridge. That's all I can remember.
Okay, interesting.
It kind of took us on a tour, you know.
So were the German people still fighting World War II, or
No,
were
this
they
was
beyond
in-
it? I mean, were
no,
they beyond
this
it
was
mentally?
Oh, no, this was in 50.
Right.
I was called back in 1950
Right. But
because of the Korean War.
were the people's attitudes different, do you think, than they were?
Some
you
were,
doing?
and some
Okay.
weren't. Some of them were very nice, and some were, I guess, like anywhere else. Got a variety of people and a variety of attitudes and opinions. But I enjoyed the experience of being a very young man then.
So while you were over there in Germany, your mom moved from Chicago to Southern California.
No, my mom moved to Southern California while I was over here.
Okay.
Because she moved in, well, you know what, yeah, probably right before I went to Germany, right after. You're right, you're like the late 49 and 50s.
Okay.
And I
What
got
caused you
this.
what caused you to move?
Oh, she got divorced and remarried and started, and she wanted to get my sisters out of Chicago. You know, it's still very violent. I mean, it's home, but it's violent. You know, I had kids fighting one another and say, "This is my territory," and they don't own anything. It just seems stupendous for me, you know. But my mentality wasn't that way. Thank God I've been raised a Christian. I let people who hate leave that on them. They got to face God, not me.
So we got you back from the military, and we got you back into UCLA. And you
Yes,
finally
sir.
got into USC.
But the ironic thing, I'll retrace one thing.
Okay.
The same dean who initially told me I wasn't college material, when I got into pharmacy school at USC, you know, in your junior, senior years, you do what they call an internship, and you work under the tutelage of a registered pharmacist. The same dean came in and had his prescription filled, and I was the one that filled it, and he never knew it. Some people say, "Why didn't you go out there?" Well, I'm not ostentatious, you know. I just thank God that I had reached that level, you know, and made that achievement. It was a personal victory for me. Because, you know, my family, my grandfather was a medical doctor, and his brother was a dentist. And, you know, I come from a medical background, education. We didn't have much money in my family. We had a whole lot of education. But anyway, I finished USC, and I worked for, I don't know if you remember, Thrifty Drugstore for 10 years. That's where I also took my internship, as well as in some of the local pharmacies. And I worked at Thrifty for about 11 years. And through a domestic situation, through a divorce, I ended up north in San Francisco. I worked there for a year in a private pharmacy. The owner of the pharmacy had also finished USC, so I knew his family. And one of the private stores that I did internship, well, his mother and stepfather owned it. So I was kind of in the family myself. So I worked, you know, in San Francisco for about a year.
Did you have any kids this time?
I had one son.
Okay.
He's presently working for CBS. He didn't like to go to pharmacy or medicine. But anyway, my first job up north in San Francisco, our pharmacy was so close to Candlestick Park, you could see when the bus went by whether the Giants won or not. That expression on the people's face. So I stayed there a little while, and I met a young lady from Vallejo, and we married. And but prior to the marriage, I worked in Oakland for about a year. And then at that time, through an SBA loan, I opened up my own pharmacy with a group in Vallejo. And while I was in Vallejo, I sponsored a little league team, and my little team won the championship for 2 years in a row. And I had a good practice there, prescription-wise. I had a lot of competition with Kaiser and a lot of the big businesses. And what happened, I got involved in a car accident and found myself after 2 years, ended up in the hospital. And of course, when I got out, I had to close, and I came back to Los Angeles. And
with your wife?
No, that particular wife, we had divorced. She went back to Virginia for some reason. And also, I didn't mention that after I originally graduated pharmacy school, I went back the following year for a year in pharmaceutical chemistry. And when I came back from my venture up north, I re-entered graduate school again, postgraduate. At that time, the pharmacy school had moved over next to the medical school here at USC. And I took 2 years of clinical pharmacy there. That's where we deal with patient profiles and drug interactions and stuff like that. But it was a good experience for me. I enjoyed consulting. I was consulting patients about drug interactions and overdoses and stuff before it was legally a requirement. I just enjoyed it. And,
is that when you got your PhD?
I got that when I originally graduated from USC.
Okay,
it was a PharmD, Doctor of Pharmacy.
Gotcha.
And so if you go to any pharmacy, you'll see the pharmacist with their name in PharmD. It's a professional degree. And I retired in 2005.
What was your thesis on for your PhD? Do you recall?
Well, we had to formulate a drugstore from the beginning.
Ah,
And this was all, I got through school through the benefit of the GI Bill, which they called at that time Public Law 550. And of course, my first wife, we worked together. I helped her through State College where she became a teacher. She helped me get through pharmacy school. And anyway, so that it's been an enjoyable experience serving people and working in the medical field.
when did you retire?
2005.
Oh, five, okay. You worked a long life then, huh?
I think it's about 45 years
Yeah.
practicing pharmacist.
Who did you work for at the end? Who did you retire from?
A personal friend of mine, unfortunately deceased now. It's a group that had about 4 pharmacies, called them AREX Pharmacy, A-R-E-X. And I worked at the one on Stocker in Santa Rosa Live in the Crenshaw area. And it was a pleasant experience.
If you look back, what was the impact that your military life had on you, do you think?
Well, discipline, love for country. You know, you had to pay a price for freedom. I just felt I was a great part of it.
Do you have any grandchildren?
Yes,
what would you
3.
What would you want to tell them? What message would you want to tell them about life in general?
Well, me and my son and my daughter, we sort of raised them as Christians, but they sort of made up their mind already what they want. My oldest group, well, my second grandson, he wants to be a pilot. My first grandson is in the music world, and my baby grandson, he wants to be a doctor. But they all, like myself, was raised in a Christian home, and their orientation was in that direction.
That's a positive thing.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's great. Well, I've enjoyed talking with you this morning. It's been a great interview.
My pleasure,
And I
sir.
want to thank you. If you want to have any kind of final comments you want to make about it?
Well, I'm just proud to have served my country. Our pastor always say, service is the price you have to pay for the seat you occupy, and my service to the country was my debt I paid for just being born in this country.
We thank you for that, sir. We really do. We appreciate that. And thank you for your time today. It's been a delight.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, sir.